Looking back, I don't know why I decided to do it. There was something about the unknown that always whispered to me. Its soft voice was a hum constantly buzzing in the back of my mind. Maybe it was the promise of quiet, or the thought of proving something to myself that only others that have tried it could understand. Or maybe this was a different type of madness, a quiet desperation that scratches at the walls of your soul, desperate to escape the mundanity of this world. I could not put my finger on it, but it drove me to the edge, right to the precipice of my sanity. I found myself in the only place I could escape, and that was to walk into the wilderness alone. This trail was more than a challenge for me. The Pacific Crest spans over 2,600 miles, slicing through California, Oregon, and Washington. I had endlessly prepared for the vast deserts, lush forests, and jagged peaks of the Sierra Nevada and the Cascade Range, but I don't think the distance or terrain is what worried me. It's where land still feels untouched by time, where the rules of our modern civilization don't exist. For a few miles, you're hiking through the sun-scorched desert, shoulders blistering through your clothes as the cracked, dry ground cripples under your feet, until you're trudging through snow-covered mountains, your breath freezing in the air as you make another slash with your ice pick. It wasn't the terrain that gnawed at me. It was the idea of being stuck with only myself. The idea of being truly, utterly alone. No phone calls, no emails. There's no human voices except my own echoing in my head. I'd always considered myself a man of few words, but there's a stark difference between choosing silence and having silence choose you. This journey demands respect. Without it, it's easy to lose yourself out there. The first few days were uneventful. Of course, the trail was just as beautiful as everyone said it would be. You get it all. Forests and sweeping vistas, the kind of scenery that you could fill your eyes with the haze of tears just from the awe of the nature around you. The pine trees served as sentinels against the sky, their needles whispering in each breeze. The air was crisp and carried the scent from the fresh pine sap and damp earth. And at night, the canopy of stars seemed so close, you could reach out and touch them, making you think you could catch your own shooting star. But it's empty. I didn't see a soul my first day. Empty. Thankfully, mile after mile, the dense forest kept me company. The landscape was ever-changing. With every step I took, the trail just seemed to stretch on endlessly, seemingly a ribbon winding through the labyrinth. With some steps, the ribbon would shrink to a mere thread, barely distinguishable amongst the dense forest, bushes, and unkept paths. Others opened up into vast fields where the sun was beating down. Sierra Nevada's glaciated expanses stopped me in my tracks. The towering granite cliffs and frozen lakes. They seemed to reflect an alternate light of our Earth. It was breathtaking, yet alien. A reminder of just how far away I was from the comforts and distractions of my normal life. It was like there was something else out there. Something ancient, watching and waiting. The solitude I found was a blessing and a curse. A whole day could pass without seeing another soul. The silence was simply profound, and I started to realize why most people don't do this alone. Even the sounds of nature seemed to have been muted, as if the trail and my steps had absorbed every bit of noise around me, leaving only the rhythmic crush of my boots on the gravel and the occasional rustle of the leaves in the trees. Now, don't get me wrong. There were times I encountered other hikers, despite my want for isolation, but those meetings were fleeting. Some people I met were seasonal hikers, their bodies lean and muscular, sinewy from weeks on the trail, and their faces weathered from the elements. They moved with determination, a simple focus in their eyes that beat into the horizon as if they were chasing something that they just couldn't catch. Others were less experienced, their faces red, flushed with exertion, exhaustion, and uncertainty. They clutched on to their maps and guidebooks as they tried to navigate their path. But whether old or new, there was a sense of camaraderie amongst the hikers. There's really a shared understanding of the challenges of this damned trail, but there was also an unspoken rule. Keep your distance, physically and emotionally. Like I said, this trail is a place of solitude, a place to comfort demons or angels without interference from others. I found our conversations were brief, often limited to a nod or a few encouraging words in passing. Everything about this journey stripped away the excess, leaving only what's important. Things started to change on the 5th day. I was led deep into the forest where the trees grew thicker, their branches weaved up above to form a dense canopy that blocked out the sun. Part of me was thankful to be away from the chance of sun blisters, but the other part of me grew discouraged with the darkness that seemed to grow around me. The air was damp and even more heavy with the scent of earth and decay. It was here where I noticed the total silence. This isn't the peaceful, natural quiet of the wilderness that would couple with my breath and the leaves beneath my boots. No, this was a dead, oppressive gag. Even the birds that chirped merrily this morning were silent now, as if they too had vanished with the death of sound. And while the wind had been constant up until this point, it started to fade now, leaving the trees unnervingly still. It makes your skin prickle. It makes you want to shout just to break it. But shouting felt wrong, like it would disturb something that shouldn't be disturbed. The forest was different. The trees grew closer together, their branches gnarled and twisted, reaching out for the trail below them. I found myself dancing on a trail the size of a thread that had once been clear and well marked, but now became narrow and barely recognizable as I pushed through the undergrowth. The sunlight, once piercing and golden, was completely gone, never penetrating the thick canopy above. A cold, dry knot of anxiety tightened in my stomach. My once steady and confident footsteps started to fluctuate as I glanced around, trying to shake the feeling that I was being watched. There's nothing, just trees, endless trees. Yeah, there's nothing. But that's when I found the cabin. It was old, older than it had any right to be. The roof sagged under the weight of decades, and its wood was gray and weathered. The door was hanging off of its hinges, windows broken. It looked as if it hadn't been touched in years, maybe decades, except the fresh shards of glass that laid by the front window. I paused, debating my options. There aren't many cabins on this stretch of the trail, and fewer still that look this forgotten. My plan had been to camp under the stars, but for the last few miles, I noticed that the forest was dense here, the ground uneven and sloping. There weren't many suitable places to set up camp, but I also couldn't have been the only hiker seeking shelter through this trail. But the carvings had caught my eyes. Strange symbols decorated the wood, geometric shapes and jagged lines that seemed to twist and writhe when you looked just a bit too long. Why didn't I just keep walking? Every single instinct screamed at me to leave, to run and get as far away from that place as possible. But that cabin drew me in. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was the silence that had settled deep into my bones that made me crave any kind of distraction. And so I stepped inside, the floorboards creaking under my weight. The smell of decay was stronger here, and the air was thick with dust. It was almost overpowering. The scent clung to my nostrils, and the sickly sweet iron odor made my stomach churn. There were a few broken pieces of furniture, but the interior was mostly bare. The wood crumbled beneath my fingers as I traced the symbols dotting the brittle walls, and then I turned to face the rest of the cabin. My blood turned cold. Bones. In the center of the room, a pile of old, brittled, yellowed with age bones. They're arranged in a circle with a large flat stone in the middle. They were clean, no flesh or sinew fixed to them, as if someone or something had meticulously stripped them bare. There was one more carving engraved into the stone, this one more detailed than all the others. It depicted a figure, tall and thin, with elongated limbs and sharp face with hollow eyes that seemed to be screaming. I stumbled back. Panic surged through me, my heart hammering through my chest. The air around me thickened, pressing me from all sides. I finally followed my damn instincts, and I left. Hell, I ran as quickly as possible, but the trail was gone. There was only a dense forest, an impenetrable wall of trees and undergrowth. I was trapped. I spent what seemed like days trying to find my way back to the main trail. Every direction I took only led me deeper into the woods. The forest seemed to shift and change around me as I walked, leading me in a circle and back to the cabin again. The trees would close in on me, the branches intertwining above me, suffocating me until I would collapse. The underbrush grew thicker, more tangled, tearing at my clothes, scratching at my skin. While the silence had finally broken, I could only hear my heart beat and the occasional rustle in the distant bushes, as if something was moving through the trees. I thought I had found another hiker. I was on another aimless trek. The branches seemed to grab at me, pushing me deep into the underbrush. I saw him from a distance at first, just a figure standing amongst the trees. He had his back turned to me. His clothes were tattered and ratted. I crawled over to get his attention, relief flooding through my body. But something was off. He didn't move. He wouldn't even acknowledge my presence. I called out to him. My voice fell and echoed in the stillness. He didn't respond. I finally reached him, still crawling, sobbing in exhaustion and relief. I touched his leg, and he turned to face me. I stared back at black holes for eyes that seemed to suck out any light that remained in the forest. His skin was pale, translucent, and his mouth hung open in a silent scream. I rolled back in horror, my heart pounding in my chest. The man, or whatever he was, didn't move. He didn't speak. He stood there, eyes empty. I found my remaining strength and I ran. I ran as fast as I could as the forest blurred around me. The trees closed in, the branches reaching out like skeletal hands trying to pull me back into the shadows. The ground was uneven, making me fall, scraping my hands and knees. But I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. Fear was now settled in my bones and had become a living being. I felt immune to any pain or exhaustion. The shadows of the forest grew thicker, as if they were alive, twisting in the corners of my vision. It felt like if the trees couldn't get me, the shadows would. I felt something dark and malevolent following me, waiting for a stumble, a trip, or any mistake to grab me. I finally burst into a small clearing, gasping for air. my heart ringing through my ears. I found the open sky and a small sigh of relief, but it was short-lived by the sense of dread and a towering building washing over me. This one was different, larger, and while it had been weathered, it had a sense of purpose, something far more sinister than just a cabin. It loomed in the center of the clearing. The dark silhouette formed long shadows that stretched out to grab me, beckoning me to come closer. Jagged shards of glass clinged to the frame of the windows like teeth. The door was already open, creaking slowly back and forth. But it wasn't the cabin that left me with horror. It was what surrounded it. Tall wooden poles carved with the same strange symbols surrounded the clearing. They were twisted and grotesque, contorted into faces of agony and madness. Some were human-like, others more feral, distorted and exaggerated. These poles seemed nothing short of ancient. Wood cracked and splintered with age, but the carvings were still sharp and clean. The ground was littered with bones. Some were white, bleached from the sun, while others were still traced with flesh and muscle. There was no pattern. It was as if everything was tossed aside carelessly, like they were no longer needed. And then there were remnants of clothing. Tattered boots and hiking bags, ripped to shreds, fluttered weakly in the wind. My heart pounded through my chest as I carefully stepped over the bones, terrified to make a sound. My breath had become shallow gasps, and I thought for a second to turn back, to accept my fate, to surrender to the monster that still haunted my mind. But there was nowhere else to go. If I turned back, I was a victim to the labyrinth, hopelessly lost within it, or worse. The cabin, though, maybe there was something inside, some kind of clue, some way out of this nightmare. I reached towards the door but hesitated. My hand hovered over the splintered wood. I could smell the tension radiating from my chest. The air was thick as if the entire forest was holding its breath. But what else could I do? The door creaked, seemingly echoing through the world around me. I slowly pushed it open, and I stepped inside. The stench slapped me in the face. It was overpowering, some nauseating combination of decay and something more acrid, almost metallic. There was just a small bit of light coming through the broken windows. Tethered remains of clothing decorated each one, teasing at what I felt was inevitable. Both the floor and walls were stained maroon from dried caked blood, and even more detailed carvings danced on the wall, ones even more intricate than the ones outside. They told stories of violence, torment, strange rituals, and monstrous beings. My skin wanted to crawl inside of me. But there it was in the center of the room. A large stone altar, slick with something that shined wet in the dim light. My stomach churned as I stepped closer, drawn to the figure that lay wrapped in torn cloth, its shape indistinguishable beneath all the layers of fabric. And then I heard it. A faint, rasping breath, like the final breaths of a dying animal. But it was alive. Barely. You see, at that point, I wanted to stop myself. Why didn't I stop myself? I reached out and I pulled back the corner of the cloth draping the being, revealing a face that was more nightmare than human. Its skin was stretched tight over its skeletal frame, eyes sunken deep into its sockets, and a sickly glowing yellow light shined through. Its mouth was hung open in that same silent scream, and its lips cracked and peeled, revealing black, rotted teeth. But its chest rose and fell in shallow, ragged breaths. Whatever this thing is, They were clinging to life by the thinnest of threads. My hands flew to my mouth to stop the scream that threatened to tear out of my body as I stumbled back, but its eyes snapped open and locked onto mine before it let out a low, guttural groan. For a moment, I was paralyzed. No way to move, no way to think. The rancid scent grew more intense and pressed down on me, making it impossible to breathe. And with a deafening crash, the door slammed behind me, plunging us into darkness. The only light I could find came from the sickly glow of the being's eyes, and they were fixed on me with a predatory glare. A dreadful scraping noise radiated throughout the room, like nails dragging across a chalkboard as the creature started to slowly move. Its body twisted, twitched, and jerked. Each spasm brought it closer to me. Of course I turned to run. Panic had surged its way through me, but the door was gone. Wood planks twisted and snarled like the branches in the forest had spiraled together, sealing me and this thing inside. The symbols carved into the walls seemed to mock me. I was trapped. I clawed frantically at the wall, desperate to find another way out. Any way out. But there was nothing. The walls pulsed, mocking my heartbeat. The symbols shifted, pulsing as if they were alive. Another bone-curdling sound rang through the cabin, but louder this time, and then I felt a cold, clammy hand wrap around my ankle. I screamed and kicked hard, but its hand held firm as its bony fingers dug deep into my skin. Its gaped mouth pulled close to my leg as I felt its breath, cold as death, graze against my skin. It started to pull me closer to the altar. I couldn't do anything but scream in terror as my eyes caught the corner of the room. My blood ran cold. There it was, impossibly tall. His limbs had stretched unnaturally and his body thin. His face was hidden by the darkness in the cabin in a dark, tattered hood, yet I could still feel his hollow eyes burning into my soul. He moved slowly and deliberately with grace. His movements were fluid, almost as if he was gliding towards me instead of walking. With each step it took, the air grew colder until I could see the breath in front of me, swirling in the light, radiating from the skeleton eyes as he dragged me across the room. Finding the altar, the creature let out a final desperate wheeze before falling into its final death in front of me, its grip finally loosening around my ankle. I wondered, was that my future? It continued to walk towards me. Its existence filled every thought in my mind with terror. I scrambled back, my heart pounding hard as my back pressed hard against the gruesome stone altar. I couldn't run. I couldn't hide. The walls closed in around me, the carvings twisting and contorting to mimic the open-mouthed scream of the thing moving towards me. It stopped just in front of me, towering over me. I could feel the cold flowing from it. I felt it in my bones, freezing me in place. It reached out its hand, long and frail, his fingers sharp with jagged nails. There was an unearthly vibrating energy penetrating into a piercing hum that grew louder and louder until I was forced to press my hands to my ears, in the fear that blood might pour out at any second. And then it touched my forehead. I felt a sharp pain like a knife cutting through my skull. Images flashed before my eyes. Horror and despair cut through my mind. Endless forests and dark forgotten trails that led to piles of bones. I saw the faces of the lost, twisted and broken, their eyes filled with horror as they wandered aimlessly through the dense forest. And then I found the poles, their forms standing as vigils for the damned. Their carvings told stories of all those who found this place before me, all of those who had been claimed by this creature. And then there was me. I saw myself, lost, alone. I was wandering through the endless trees, my smile falling into a gaped silent scream. And then the creature's voice echoed into my mind, a low, rasping scream that danced into my brain and sent shocks through my spine. Welcome to the forest, where the lost find their homes. And with those words, it pulled its hand back, and the world around me fell into darkness. When I finally woke up, I was laying on the forest floor. The cabin was gone. There were no bones, no poles. The sun was setting, casting long shadows through the trees. My body ached and my head throbbed. But I was alive. I stumbled to my feet with my legs trembling beneath me. There was still no trail around me. But I really didn't care anymore. I just wanted out, to leave this forest and never come back. And so I started walking. My steps were unsteady and my mind still reeled from the horrors of that creature. As I walked, the forest changed. It seemed as if everything went back to normal. The trees grew taller, their branches reaching towards the sky, not towards me, threatening to grab me. The underbrush that was once thicker and tangled started to clear. But the air was cold and it grew colder with every step I took. I could feel the creature's eyes on me, watching and waiting. I don't know how long I walked. I guess I should have brought a map like the people I saw before. I eventually found myself standing at the edge of a cliff. The forest below me stretched out for as far as I could possibly see. There was nothing but a dark, impenetrable sea of trees. The wind howled through the branches, letting out a mournful wail that sent a chill throughout my body. There's no way out. I was claimed to the forest, just like the creature had claimed all those souls before me. I was trapped, lost in this nightmare, with no escape. I stood there staring down at the abyss of trees. I felt its eyes on me. I didn't need to turn around to know that it was the creature. I could simply feel its cold breath on the back of my neck. I could hear the rustle of his tattered robes as it moved closer to me. I would never truly escape this nightmare. This place will always be with me, even if I could find a way out. It is simply a twisted place that exists both in my mind and in our world. It's where the lost go to die, and where darkness could never fade. The forest won. The creature had won. I accepted my fate and closed my eyes. And with a final desperate scream, I stepped off the edge of the cliff. Now, I'm not sure if it was days, weeks, or months later, but they found me. But I was a broken shell of a man. I was babbling incoherently about forests and cabins and wooden carved symbols that twisted into human form. My clothes were tattered, my body nearly skin and bones covered in cuts and bruises. They said I was lucky to be alive, but I knew the truth. The forest took what it wanted, and it let me go. My mind, my soul. There was nothing left but the memories of the horrors of that forest. But even now, as I sit in the warmth and safety of my normal life, I can hear the whispers of the creature. I could feel the cold touch of those dead hands and the forest in the dead of the night. Because the forest never truly lets you go. It just waits. And one day, that creature will call me back. And when he does, I'll answer. Because some part of me, some dark, twisted part of me, still belongs in that forest. And it always will.